The old Windfallen tree had always been a shelter. Its roots, twisted upward like frozen claws, formed a hollow just large enough for a small creature to slip inside. Rabbits before him had used it for generations. The hollowness smelled of damp bark, old moss, and the quiet safety of places predators rarely bothered to search. But tonight, the hollow felt different. Too still, too silent, too cold. Rabbit crouched deep beneath the tangled roots, sides rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. He pressed his body against the earth where it was usually warm with life, worms moving, roots drinking, soil settling with its slow, living sighs. But the earth was motionless. Even the insects were gone. No soft burrowing beneath him, no flutter of moth wings outside, no distant rustle of leaves. The forest wasn't just quiet, it wasn't breathing. Rabbit lifted his head, nose twitching. The air smelled wrong. Not of danger, not fox, not hawk, not any familiar predator. It smelled like nothing, as if the air had forgotten what scent was. He poked his head cautiously from beneath the roots. The forest stood pale and unmoving. Not from frost, spring had come early this year, but from a strange stillness, a heaviness that settled over tree trunks and moss and fallen needles like a hand pressing down. Rabbit's ears tilted high. He listened. No wind, no rustling branches, no owls, no mice, not even his own heartbeat seemed willing to make noise. He stepped out from under the tree, paws sinking into soft soil. He expected the usual give of the earth, but the ground felt stiff, almost brittle. He pulled his foot back quickly, shaking it, startled by the sensation. The forest floor did not respond. No shifting of dirt, no whisper of leaves, nothing. Rabbit sat back on his hind legs, sniffing the air with quick, frantic motions. Usually the forest was a sea of scents. Fox trails, the sweetness of mushrooms, damp bark, the unmistakable sharpness of hawk feathers overhead. Tonight, nothing. A void. Rabbit hopped forward a few steps, nose close to the ground. Even his own prints didn't seem to carry scent. He paused, pulse racing. Something had taken the breath out of the forest. A sudden crackling sound made him flinch. He froze, wide eyes, long ears stiff. The crackling wasn't behind him, wasn't beside him, it was beneath him. He hopped back quickly, landing beneath the wind-fallen tree again. He pressed his body low, trembling as he listened. Crackle, crackle, not like twigs snapping, not like leaves crushed underfoot, like bark drying too quickly, like something old tightening. The wind-fallen tree shuddered faintly above him. Rabbit pressed deeper into the hollow, claws scraping the dirt. He'd taken shelter here 100 times, during rainstorms, during owl hunts, during winter nights, but never had the tree moved. He flattened his ears. Crackle! The moss along the trunk curled inward as if shrinking. Tiny flakes of bark fell in slow motion, drifting downward without a whisper. Rabbit watched them descend, held his breath, and the flakes did not land. They hovered, suspended in the air. Rabbit blinked, then blinked again. The bark fragments floated like dust motes caught in a beam of sunlight, but there was no sunlight, only dim, cloudy dusk. He stretched his neck slightly, whiskers trembling. The tiny flakes turned slowly in the air, then stopped. Frozen. Rabbit backed deeper beneath the roots, heart pounding so fast it almost hurt. He felt the cold creeping into the hollow, not like winter's cold, but like emptiness, like the space between heartbeats. The forest above him groaned, a long, low sound that seemed to come from the trees themselves, as if every trunk held its breath too long and finally exhaled. Branches shifted, not swaying, not bending, just moving out of place by a fraction, like the forest was adjusting itself without wind. Rabbit crouched lower, nose pressed to the dirt. He prayed the forest would breathe again. But instead, something breathed back. A long, quiet inhale from somewhere deep among the trees. Too deep, too cold, too slow. The forest hadn't died, It was waking. Rabbit's fur stood on end as the roots above him trembled, and in the silence that followed, the tiny flakes of bark began drifting toward him. Not falling, not blown, drawn, as if something in the hollow wanted them, as if something beneath the tree wanted him. The flakes of bark drifted toward Rabbit in an unnatural stillness, slow, deliberate, as if pulled by a quiet inhaling he could not see. Rabbit pressed himself tighter against the back of the hollow, claws digging into dirt that no longer felt like dirt. It was too firm, too smooth, as though the earth had forgotten how to crumble. The bark flakes hovered inches from his whiskers. Rabbit shut his eyes tight. Nothing touched him. After a long, trembling moment, he cracked one eye open. The flakes had stopped, frozen mid-air, caught between one heartbeat and the next. Rabbit's nose twitched uncontrollably. He inched backward until his spine pressed the twisted roots. His breath came fast, puffing into tiny clouds that didn't drift. They hung in front of him, suspended like the bark. His breath didn't move the air. The air didn't move at all. The forest wasn't breathing. Rabbit forced himself to swallow the rising panic. He listened, ears perked, rotating like fragile leaves. Nothing. Even fear made no sound here. He nudged one of the hovering bark flakes gently with his nose. It didn't drift, didn't fall, didn't even shudder. It remained suspended, as though held by invisible threads. He was trapped in a moment that refused to end. Then, a vibration deep under the earth. Faint, barely noticeable, but enough to rattle Rabbit's bones. The bark flakes shivered. The forest groaned again, deeper this time, like a long breath being drawn from very far away. The roots above him curled slightly, not enough to crush him, but enough to remind him that they could. Rabbit backed out from the hollow, forcing himself into the open. The air outside wasn't any better, still unmoving, thick with tension, but at least nothing hovered here. He took a cautious hop forward. The moment his paw touched the ground, the soil pulsed. Rabbit jerked back, ears flattened, staring at the earth where he'd stepped. The ground was rising in a slow swell, as if something beneath it had pushed upward gently. Another pulse. The forest floor shifted again. The pulse wasn't violent. It wasn't threatening. It was rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Rabbit trembled, a heartbeat coming from below. He scanned the trees desperately. The forest was warped by stillness, branches bent at stiff angles, leaves suspended mid-tremble as if frozen in time. He hopped backward, eyes wide. Then the wind-fallen tree behind him exhaled. Not loudly, not violently, a low, soft exhale, like air leaving hollow wood. Rabbit whipped around, fur bristling. The roots he had hidden beneath were spreading, slowly, silently, stretching outward like fingers testing the air. The hollow beneath them widened, not collapsing, opening, inviting. Rabbit stumbled back, shaking. His instincts screamed flee, but something heavier pressed against his mind. A weight, a pull, a quiet beckoning. As if the hollow wasn't widening for threat, but for him. He heard the inhale again. Not from the tree, not from the earth. From beneath. A long, slow, cold inhale, as if something below the roots was drawing breath into lungs that had not moved in years. Rabbit's paws slipped on the rigid soil. He scrambled toward a nearby stump, but froze when he saw it. The stump had changed. What should have been rough rings of wood were now smooth, polished, curving inward in a spiral like a fingerprint burned into the grain. Rabbit approached cautiously. The spiral pulsed. Once, a tiny pulse of light, greenish, faint, travelling inward toward the centre as though the stump were drawing it in. Rabbit backed away with a small squeak. Then he noticed more spirals, on stones, on fallen branches, on exposed roots, all faintly glowing, all pulsing, all drawing inward, toward the wind-fallen tree. Rabbit turned toward it in horror. Between the spreading roots, deep in the hollow, light flickered, a soft green glow, pulsing in rhythm with the earth. Rabbit's heartbeat stuttered. The forest wasn't breathing because something else was. Something beneath the roots. The tree inhaled again, and this time the pulse of the earth answered. The green light brightened, the spirals deepened their glow, and Rabbit, small, trembling, vulnerable, felt the weight of 1,000 quiet eyes turning toward him from the soil. He tried to run, his paws refused, root-bound, soil-held, as if the ground itself clung to him. Slowly, the hollow beneath the tree widened further, and something inside whispered in a voice barely formed, barely there. "Come back." Rabbit's fur stood on end. The tree wasn't offering shelter, it was calling him home. Rabbit's legs trembled as the whisper faded into the still air. "Come back." The forest held the words like a held breath. No echo, no breeze, no movement, as though the trees themselves were listening. Rabbit pulled one paw upward, trying to flee, but the earth clung to him with a stiffness that wasn't natural. Not mud, not roots. Something beneath the soil refused to let go. He jerked harder, his paw tore free, cold shot through his leg, crawling upward like frost beneath his skin. He flinched, stumbling away, panting hard. The green spirals on the nearby stump brightened. Not with light, with attention. They pulsed inward again, drawing whatever faint glow existed into their center, feeding the unseen thing beneath the wind-fallen tree. Rabbit hopped backward, ears low and flat. He wanted to flee into the deeper forest, into the brush, anywhere, but each step seemed heavier, like the ground thickened behind him. He turned. The path he came from was gone, not blocked, not overgrown, gone. The trees no longer lined where they should. Their trunks had shifted, just slightly, just subtly, but enough to twist the forest's layout into something unfamiliar. Branches that once arched overhead now intertwined in tangled patterns. Small saplings that weren't there minutes ago grew crookedly, blocking narrow paths. The moss at the base of the oaks no longer lay soft. Its edges had stiffened like dried paint. The forest was rearranging itself. Rabbit spun back toward the wind-fallen tree. The hollow beneath it glowed a deeper green now, a warm, pulsing light, steady like a heartbeat. The pulses matched the trembling of the ground, and somewhere beneath all that, he heard movement. Soft, slow, wet, something pushing through earth, something large enough that Rabbit felt vibrations through his paws. He backed away again, only 2 steps, before stopping, because the bark flakes that had hovered in the hollow were now floating outward. One by one they drifted through the air like dust in reversed time, sliding toward the twisted roots. They spun lazily, forming spirals mid-air, matching the markings on the stump. Rabbit's nose twitched wildly, overwhelmed by the scent of nothing. Still nothing. He couldn't smell sap, couldn't smell soil, couldn't smell rot or insects or life. The forest's breath had been replaced. The hollow glowed brighter. A crack ran through the center of the wind-fallen tree, thin, quiet, deliberate. The crack glowed green. Rabbit flattened himself to the ground, heart hammering. The crack widened. A faint sound escaped from within the tree. Not wood breaking, not wind. A sigh, a single, slow exhale. Rabbit whimpered. The spirals on the ground brightened. More bark flakes drifted, gathering around the crack, adhering to it as though drawn by magnetic force. They arranged themselves in swirling patterns, forming strange, delicate designs that pulsed gently. Rabbit couldn't look away. The tree inhaled, the spirals tightened, the earth trembled. Underneath the roots, the soft movement grew louder, like something enormous shifting, repositioning, waking from a long sleep. Rabbit pressed himself flat. The glow strengthened until the hollow was bright enough to cast a dim, sickly green hue across the nearest trunks. Then, a shape rose beneath the roots. At first, Rabbit thought it was a root itself. Long, curved, smooth, but the shape moved against the grain of the wood. It curled upward, slow, deliberate, breaking soil in long lines. A limb, but not a paw, not a claw, not something known. Smooth, pale, like bone wrapped in bark. The limb pressed gently against the underside of the fallen trunk, and the entire tree shifted upward half an inch. The earth exhaled with it. Rabbit scrambled backward, hind legs slipping on the rigid soil. Every instinct in him screamed to flee, to run, to dig, but the forest held him in its rearranged cage of trunks and roots. The limb curled more tightly. Another limb rose beside it, thinner, branching into multiple tendrils at the end. Hands made of root and bone and glowing green veins. Rabbit stared, frozen, breath shaking. The hands pulled the earth apart. Soil crumbled inward, drawn like sand down a funnel. The hollow opened like a widening mouth, and from within that darkness, eyes appeared. Not glowing, not bright, just open, wide, wet, reflecting the green light around them. They blinked once. Then the voice came again, stronger now. Come back! The forest held its breath, and the hands reached out toward Rabbit. The hands reached out, slow, unhurried, as if certain the small trembling creature before them had nowhere left to flee. Rabbit pressed himself against the cold earth, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The green glow from the hollow painted the forest in sickly light. Every tree trunk, every patch of moss, every fallen branch pulsed faintly in rhythm with the thing beneath the wind-fallen tree. The forest was breathing again, but with its breath. The root-bone hands stretched wider, grasping the edges of the hollow, pulling them apart. Soil split like soft cloth. The old trunk groaned, bowing upward under the strain. Rabbit's breath came in short, frantic bursts. The eyes beneath the roots stared unblinking, reflecting green and shadow. They were too human, too aware, but not alive in any way Rabbit understood. No emotion, no hunger, no warmth, just focus, on him. The voice came again, not from the eyes, not from the hands, but from the earth itself. Come back! Rabbit tried to scramble away, but the rearranged forest had closed around him. Trees leaned inward, branches locked overhead like bony ribs. The ground behind him steepened, pushing him unconsciously toward the hollow. He wasn't trapped by roots or soil, he was trapped by intention. The creature beneath the wind-fallen tree shifted, rising inch by inch. More of its form emerged, a smooth pale arc of something like a shoulder. Threads of bark-like skin peeled away from its surface as though shedding years of burial. Green veins pulsed across it in branching patterns, spirals, just like the ones on the stump. The spirals expanded with each breath the creature took. Rabbit whimpered. His instinct screamed run, but his paws felt anchored, emotionally, or perhaps literally, by the oppressive air. Even lifting a paw felt like lifting a stone. The creature's eyes didn't blink again. They remained wide, watching him in a way that felt almost familiar, like someone searching for memory in the shape of another. A third hand rose from beneath the roots, smaller, trembling, shaped almost like a rabbit's paw, twisted into something more like a withered branch. The forest pulsed once, a deep, echoing heartbeat. The air shifted, heavy enough to make Rabbit flatten his ears. Then it happened. The wind-fallen tree moved. It didn't crack or break. It shifted, lifting an inch higher, then another, as the creature beneath stood taller. Dirt slid off its form in soft sheets. Roots untangled themselves from the corpse of the fallen trunk, retracting like limbs reclaiming control. For the first time, sound returned to the forest. A low creaking groan like ancient wood bending after a century of stillness. Rabbit jolted, fur bristling. He pressed himself against the nearest tree, but even that trunk curved subtly, drawing him closer to the unfolding hollow. The creature's full head emerged now. Oval, smooth, covered in pale bark-like texture that shifted in patterns resembling tree rings. Its face had no mouth, only the eyes. eyes that saw too much and understood too little. Eyes filled with green reflection, but no life of their own. The spirals on the ground brightened, the spirals on its chest brightened. Everything connected to the hollow glowed as one. Rabbit finally found strength and bolted sideways, a wild instinctive dash fueled by terror rather than logic. He made it only 2 hops before the forest moved. Branches swung down like nets, roots curled upward like grasping fingers, trunks leaned just a little too far, and a narrow passage opened, leading not away from the creature, but straight toward it. Rabbit skidded to a halt, panting. The creature tilted its head. Green light pooled in its eyes, rippling outward like waves on a still pond. The hands, 3 of them now above the earth, slowly opened their fingers. Not grasping, not demanding, inviting. The forest quieted, completely, as if listening for Rabbit's breath. He trembled. The voice returned, closer, clearer. "You left." Rabbit's chest tightened. The creature lifted one hand, palm facing him, bark and bone and pulsing green light. A second whisper followed. "Come back." Rabbit's heart seized in a moment of dreadful recognition. This thing beneath the tree, this thing wearing the forest stillness, this thing calling him back, it didn't want a rabbit. It wanted what the forest once had and lost, and now it thought he was the key. The hollow widened once more. The creature's limbs extended fully into the open air, and for the first time its mouth split open, silent, white, too wide, not to speak, to breathe. A single inhale drew every loose leaf, every drifting mote, every suspended fragment of bark toward it. The forest itself bent. Rabbit clung to the earth as the pull tightened. He understood now. The creature wasn't awakening, it was remembering, and it wanted him to remember with it.